So blockchain. Blockchain is the most revolutionary technology to come along, turning the internet to the internet of value. Blockchain is the most overhyped technology right now, where we had all the major OTAs saying maybe a 1, maybe a 2. Well, what happens when you have new technology like this is that the truth is somewhere in the middle. Now, we look a lot at the faucet. We look a lot at the interface. Here's a new interface. It's voice, it's chat, it's a digital assistant. But really, the power around blockchain is around the plumbing.
Up next, an executive panel, Blockchain, Game Changer or Bust, featuring co-CEO and co-founder of BlockSky, Brooke Armstrong, the CEO of Arise Travel, Nadim El Manawi, and the head of demand growth at Dtravel, Cynthia Huang. Please welcome your moderator for this session, Senior Technology and Corporate Market Analyst at Phocuswright, Norm Rose.
So all those that are out in the hall should definitely come in. This is the future we're talking about, and it's happening now. That clip was from 2017. At that point, I was introducing blockchain to this community as a new technology. I am so pleased to have an expert panel who have companies that are running blockchain travel systems right now. I mean, we are, for those who think this is vaporware, that it's coming 5 to 10 years from now, we're going to be talking about this technology today and give you that impression of what it can be done today. So I wanted to start off, we kind of drew straws in the background here on who's going to explain in simple terms what blockchain is. And Cynthia drew the straw, so I want to begin with, if you can just, for the audience, for those who don't understand what this technology is, how can you put it in simple terms?
Yeah, I think that we talk a lot about technology, and at the end of the day, it's an enabling technology. But really, to me, what blockchain and Web3 represents is a cultural and societal shift from being a user to being an owner, and blockchain technology is what's going to enable this shift for that to happen. And blockchain technology really empowers people to be the owners of their own data and also to be owners of the platforms and products that they participate in.
Sounds good. Distributed ownership. So, do you think that blockchain has to be understood in order to actually use it? That's the question. Because so many people are enthralled with, I need to understand how this technology works, and are losing sight of maybe the bigger picture.
Yeah, I think that just like you have with any technology adoption curve, you have the early adopters, right? So these are us nerds out there who really geek out on the technology, who love to understand it on a very deep level. But true adoption is when you can use it and you don't need to understand because it's so simple and easy to use. If you think about the internet, that's how everybody's using it today, and you don't understand the plumbing that goes behind it. Nobody understands packets or HTTP protocol. It doesn't matter because it's so easy to use that you just use it. And so that's the place that we need to get to for blockchain technology and Web3 to truly become mainstream.
That's great, thank you. So let's go over to Brooke. Can you just describe your company, how are you using blockchain, what your focus is? And then we'll have Nadim also respond, and then Cynthia.
Yeah, so we focus on corporate travel, and just to put this in the it's happening now versus future context, we do 2,200 transactions a day. By the end of next year, we're set to triple that. So anywhere between $1 million to $2 million in sales a day. Today, now. So the way that we see the world is that in the future, there will be omni-channel corporate bookings. Travelers will be shopping and booking on Delta, shopping on Delta, but then booking on the OBT, shopping on the OBT, booking on Delta, changing on the kiosk, and then working with an agent who's not Delta, et cetera. And when you say that, then you start thinking about the GDS, the mid-office, the back office, the expense system, ERP, et cetera. And the question is in this new world where all these APIs are flying around on the offer, order, request level, where are you going to bring all that data back? And for us, it's a very simple answer. It's a cryptographic audit log. It's a record of what happened that's cryptographically signed by the parties who are engaged in any of those transactions. And that's the single version of the truth that publishes out everything from the user's Google or Outlook calendar all the way down to expense and reporting. And then when you do that, you can look back at the spaghetti that you have and start to realize, like, oh, that piece of spaghetti can go out, this one can go out, and this one can go out, and I need these ones over here, but not over there. And that's how we. That's what we do, and we focus on large corporate buyers.
So when you talk about the volume of transactions, those payment transactions, what types of transactions are you referring to?
Yeah, so we kick in when there is actually a ticket. So we believe strongly that suppliers are pushing the POS and the shopping and the ordering out into the traveler's hands. We think that continuous pricing, the API link between, for example, Uber and Marriott Bonvoy, between Amazon and Avis, that stuff is going to just get more and more proliferated as suppliers acquire customers from other suppliers. But once there's a transaction, that's when it gets real. And it gets real from service, duty of care, reporting, traveler tracking, everything down to including settlement. And for us, one of the innovations of blockchain is actually to take the payment and settlement gesture and move those closely together. And actually, for example, in the case of Bitcoin, payment and settlement are one gesture. The market's not there now. And I'm not saying that people are going to buy tickets with Bitcoin. I don't think they ever will. But I do think that all payment innovation is about moving payment and settlement as closely as possible together and ultimately in being one gesture. Whatever flavor that has, I do think that will be in blockchain.
Great. Nadeem, can you tell us a little bit about Arise? And
sure. I'll make it short because a lot of it is similar to what you already described. But Arise is a distributed ledger-based network for hotel distribution. And so very similar to what Brooke was describing, it's to create this scalable real-time source of truth between transacting parties, in our case hotels and travel companies, which could be OTAs, TMCs, tour operators, you name it. And just essentially allowing these parties to transact in a much more efficient, trusted way with more powerful capabilities moving forward. So that's Arise in a nutshell.
All right, and you were nice enough to explain blockchain in general. How about Dtravel? What's the focus?
So Dtravel is a Web3 powered vacation rental ecosystem, and essentially we're a technology provider that uses blockchain technology to power direct booking websites for hosts and a booking engine. And that's the first product that we're focused on, but really in the long run we're looking at building out a protocol that becomes a source of truth for listing data that anyone can build on and distribute.
So if you are still confused, I would encourage you to watch the rest of that video that I did back in 2017, which goes through some of the use cases and the markets and kind of the basic thrust of blockchain so that you can understand. But I thought it was very interesting, Brooke, when you were tying payment and transactions, because that's at the heart of what we're saying from a structural change. So right now, you book a hotel or a vacation rental, who controls the money and who gets paid when? So can maybe anyone talk a little bit about the cost savings potential just from the distribution side of the fence, and then we'll talk a little bit from the consumer side. So what's the comparative of going through your blockchain networks and cost? You don't have to be specific, but just kind of rough order of magnitude versus traditional systems?
I'll throw out 4%.
I'm sorry?
I'll throw out 4%.
4%, okay.
Yeah.
4% meaning what?
Oh, I thought you were saying aggregate savings versus...
Oh, about 4% savings on each shop.
In terms of incumbent settlement processes, I would say 4.
That's significant. 4% to the bottom line.
Happy to unpack that for the haters. So I work for Walmart, and I've got a conference in Tampa. So I pick up Concur, get my ticket, credit card, get my expense report, fill out my expense report. Expense report might fail because the code that I had wasn't active. So expense report doesn't get filed on time. Amex has to pay United, but there's a late fee that netted out the rebate, so Walmart's not getting the rebate. Get my expense report in. So there are many corporate accounts in the world who they, in theory, get a rebate back, but they never get a rebate back because it's netted out from the late fees. So let's just do a merchant fee of 2.75%. Let's say it's a full 2.75% because they're not getting the rebate back. Let's add in all the reconciliation and the work that I did in order to fill out an expense report that creates a payable that goes to a credit card company so the credit card company can pay the airline. And if I were working for a professional services company and I'm actually billing that out to a client, then send the invoice out to the client and they paid me, but then if I canceled it because I can't go, then I have COVID, then I have unused ticket value in my profile that I can't use and it doesn't belong to my employer, it actually belongs to my client because I work at a law firm. So that mess, if you don't do that, yeah, I'd say it's 4.
That's fascinating. You know, everyone says how complex blockchain is. That sounds pretty complex, the current system, and somewhat flawed. How would you respond to that question?
I mean, for me, with payments, there's two aspects. First is coming back to that source of truth. Like you just described an entire scenario where people don't have visibility over what's going on regardless of what the scenario is. So where blockchain or distributed ledger comes in is having, again, transacting parties know exactly what's going on and which action has to be taken at any given moment, depending on the scenarios. All of that is built in a trusted, transparent way between transacting parties. That's the basic starting point, and it solves most of the issues. Then, okay, now that we have that source of truth, then how is the payment actually then handled? Right away, right now you could do it even with regular bank transfers or VCC or whatever, or you can take it up a notch if you get into like the stable coins. That's maybe another conversation to be had, but I do believe like stable coins will become very important, especially in B2B payments, because then you can save a lot on the credit card fees and a bunch of other stuff. But that's where I mean, going back to what I was saying, there's really like 2 steps. First, you solve the real-time source of truth, data quality, trust between the transacting parties, and then you figure out what's the best way of actually enabling that payment, which could be traditional ways and potentially, I think, stable coins in the future.
You know, we could all use more transparency and more trust in the industry. And so those are important words, and I appreciate that perspective. So you're in the vacation rental space. What's the difference for the property manager working with you or working with one of the existing OTAs who focus on that?
I think there's 2 ways to look at it. There's the transaction layer, which there's cost savings there, and then there's the operational layer. So on the transaction level, if you get a payout either from Stripe or say PayPal, you're probably paying somewhere between like 3 to 5%, depending on where you're located. When you get a payout in cryptocurrency, you pay, you know, maybe 10 cents, regardless of the amount. And so you can imagine what a huge cost savings that is when you have hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars in revenue. And then from an operational perspective, because smart contracts are just code that automate actions based on specific parameters, now you don't need to have somebody go and send payments, to look at settlement, to have to look at bookkeeping, because all of that is automated via code. So you're basically reducing all of that overhead from manual intervention. So it becomes a really, really huge cost savings, and that's something that our hosts experience, and that gets passed on to the guests as well, where they're paying, you know, 18 to 20% on other platforms. But for us, if they pay with crypto, again, they're only paying, you know, maybe 10 cents for a payment, versus you know, maybe 3% if they are going to pay with a credit card. So it's huge savings because we're basically automating all of the stuff that normally is done by people.
So a frequent comment I get from startups when they talk to me is, you know, which API do I connect into? And it seems like this industry, I know very well, lags behind general technology. And so the API craze is what, about 10 years ago in general IT, and now it's, you know, it's kind of part of our fabric here. But when we talk about this solution and we talk about blockchain, would you say it's true that once you connect into the blockchain, as a supplier, there's not additional connections that are needed. I mean, someone has to maintain that connection. But then you basically have access to anyone else on the chain dictated by the smart contract. Here's the rules of engagement. Here's the type of distributor or an OTA that I'm willing to work with, or the type of customer that I'm looking for. Comments on that? Is that an accurate description from your experience?
Yeah, I think maybe a parallel to draw is when the internet first came around, the reason why the internet became so widespread was because you had protocols that everybody followed, right? And with blockchain, it's the same way. When you have a data source that then has a protocol for people to interact with it, it becomes a lot more scalable and quick and open for anyone to build with it versus you trying to incorporate 100 different APIs. And so it's just a different way of interacting with the data where you have the data as the source of truth and then connections versus right now what you have are multiple connections and all of these data silos. So I think it's just a very different way of interacting with that data.
It's hard to have a single source of truth if there's multiple sources of truth.
Yeah, exactly.
Any other comments on that idea of connect once and connect to anyone?
I do think that's true when it comes to the value transfer or the commitment to fulfill travel. But I do think that one of the things that's going on in the market in general now is that suppliers are actually just starting to know what it feels like to own their customers. So I think if you look at an airline like Delta or even Emirates or especially Bonvoy, they're sort of quasi-building out lifestyle brands. And I think they've done very well in actually training customers to think that travel means opening up the Bonvoy app. And I don't think, it's like, you know, for those of us who are not the supplier, let Bonvoy do that. Let them do that. They're probably on a decade-long journey of stacking more and more stuff into Bonvoy. So if you're not the supplier and you're by definition a third party, I think the question is how do you support them in that journey? And I think they've got I think they're gonna skin their knees in some places. I think they're actually gonna be very successful. And so for us, what that means is to say, you know, allow them to do that, but understand that they do live in an ecosystem, and there are things that happen because that trip needs to be attached in some way to a folio that includes air, and then somebody else over here actually needs to service that. So for us, that's where that kicks in. And I do agree with you that the chain is a source for you know, actual just data integrity and settlement. In terms of, you know, on-chain business logic and smart contracts, I think, you know, that's going to be a step-by-step process. I'm very excited about it. We will need some regulatory clarity. I know as somebody who spends a fair amount of my time dealing with GDPR in California, that adds time.
Understood. So I wanted to talk about identity. So I did a morning session about a topic that seems to be over talked about in this industry, which is personalization. Everyone has an idea for personalization. But this effort towards self-sovereign identity, which means that I own my data and that I have then the ability to release aspects of that based on, you know, ability to get a better offer. But there's also corporate identity, right? That I'm a corporation and therefore I have the value either as a corporate buyer in the sense of corporate travel or as a trading partner. I'm a wholesaler and therefore I'm identified as that wholesaler. So can we talk a little bit about identity? Anyone who feels comfortable, maybe Nadeem?
I mean, corporate identity is already happening now. Like, I'm not super familiar with how you guys operate, but I'm assuming each entity on your network has its own verified identity, which is the same with us. So this is already happening without even really the corporation buying into it or understanding, but it's just the nature of how blockchain works. And so I do believe that corporate identity is going to come first, because SSI from an individual perspective will happen, but I don't think it's going to be driven by travel. I have a feeling travel will tag along once it will have been massively adopted for whatever, if it's for healthcare or another use case. I doubt it's going to be travel driving this from an individual perspective, personal opinion. But corporate identity, 100%, because it's already happening.
Any other comments about individual and corporate identity?
On the individual side, this is an area I'm really passionate about. And one of the projects that we're working on is called an NFT passport. And the idea is that you will use that as your identity to take with you and use that to personalize your experience, on the topic of personalization. And this topic came up in our roundtable yesterday. People were very passionate about it. And one of the questions I always get is, for me as a consumer, how is this beneficial? And if you think about checking into all these different hotels or vacation rentals or flights, etc., you have individual profiles saved across all of these channels. And yes, you own your own data, meaning that you have access to it and you're the one who inputs it, but it's really hard to take that data and they become siloed data as well. Imagine if you had some form of identity, some kind of verifiable credential that you could share with someone that talks about your preferences. So if you say, I go to hotels, I'm a really eco-conscious traveler, I don't want my hotel room cleaned, I like soft pillows, I definitely want something with a gym. This starts to be used for all of these hospitality providers to really personalize that experience and make it feel like it's really custom, even though it's not really, right? Because it's already built into all the things that they already do anyway. But it becomes easy for the consumer to port that identity with them and only share what they want to share and keep back what they don't want to share. And then for the hospitality provider, they get data that, again, has a very similar data set across wherever they go. So it's a way of standardizing personalization in a way that doesn't exist today because it's so fragmented. So I think that there's a lot of benefits to both the hospitality providers, but also the travelers on this side. And unfortunately, as Nadeem said, I think we are pretty far away from that because there's a lot of resistance and we're dealing with a lot of legacy infrastructure that we have to solve for first.
Legacy infrastructure is the name of the game in this industry, isn't it?
I think just to make this very real for myself, I have had an enormous amount of on-chain transactions. And when 2020 and 2021 was going just bonkers with crypto markets, I was doing a lot of transactions, and then I paid taxes for those. And I pay taxes by taking my wallet addresses and putting them into an application called CoinTracker, and CoinTracker just takes the data on chain and says this is what you owe the IRS. And I was going through this data set and I thought, this is really uncomfortable. There's a lot of information about me here. So that's a conversation for another time. What does this mean for regulation, tax liability, et cetera, what have you. But the reality is I was looking at me in the face that here are all of my transactions, and they're true. None of these are disputed. And in no other part of my economic life is it so easy for me to just say, here's all my hotel transactions, or here's all my, in theory, my credit card report has some things, but it's only some things. This is not a tomorrow thing. This is not a next year thing. But as all of these transactions do go on chain and you start to link these addresses and see who people are, that's powerful. I'll be honest, my first, I clutched my pearls at the first. I was like, this is a little weird, but that's the weird, wild world we're heading into. And I think that we'll see a lot of applications built on top of that.
So during this session, we've talked a lot about different aspects of how blockchain is today transforming things. Payment, transparency, single source of truth, identity. All these things are happening. The most important thing to remember, this is not a travel industry thing. The internet was not a travel industry thing. When Philip started this conference, there was no transactions on the internet. And I was there, I remember. If you think this is all pie in the sky, you should talk to each of these panelists and understand exactly how they're doing this in real world. So I'll give everyone just a few moments to kind of tag onto that. What would be the message you'd like to send in just a couple of words, beginning with...
maybe start with Brooke.
Oh, well,
I got to formulate my answer.
well, you started, so okay, we'll have Brooke start the end here.
It's a wild moment in the crypto markets right now. If anybody has access to a newspaper or the internet, Yes, it's freaky right now. But the spaghetti soup that we live in now is more complex than the single version of the truth that we're working on.
Yeah, and to add to that, like you don't have to be scared. Don't be scared to actually be interested in trying it, because our job and people working on blockchain initiatives is to actually make it easy. You don't need to understand how everything works under the hood to get started. It could be a step-by-step approach. So yeah, don't feel, be curious and actually don't be afraid of trying it out.
Yeah.
And Cynthia, you get the last word.
Yay. So I think as Norm says, this is something that's happening today, right now. It's not necessarily something happening 10 years from now. It's definitely going to evolve. But just like the internet, just like the mobile era, if you don't start to learn now, you're going to get left behind. And that's why we're all here talking about this, because it's so important. And we're here to be the bridge for you to understand and make that jump, because there's a lot of technology changes that are going to change your business. And so you can either disrupt yourselves or be disrupted.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, panelists.